Matt Tyner, welcome to Bereave Studios.
Clifford, thank you for having me.
Of course, for you, even though you know this, I'm going to say it for people who might not. The goal of this podcast is to build community through shared experiences. And today, we get the very generous offer, your journey, your experience. For me, it's obvious, but I am interested in your take of, hey, we floated this idea. Come chat with us a little bit. And you really quickly just said, yeah, I'm in. Why is that?
I think one thing that you notice firsthand going through it is that it happens to a lot of people, whether it's cancer or death or, losing someone suddenly. You're not alone. And I just, right when it happened to me, I just, kind of fully committed to being comfortable sharing, trying to remove some of the stigma that comes with it and feels so isolating. And what better opportunity than this one?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for that. And not that you need validation about sharing, but that is consistently what we hear. The reason we do this is because it is so common yet so tough and still remains incredibly taboo in our society. And to have people like you that are committed to coming out and having conversations about death, about loss, about grief, might make it easier for one more person to be able to do that. And that's a pretty cool thing.
That's right. And I know we're going to dig into this later, but this whole concept of like grief and how to work through it and even latent grief, it really does all boil down to leveraging relationships around you.
Right.
It's so much harder to do by yourself. If you can get comfortable bringing people in, and leveraging those relationships during those very dark, very hard times, it expedites your path through. And without your own comfort in sharing, it's really hard for others to lend a hand.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for having that perspective outside of having a microphone in your face. Today, talking about Laura Tyner, Mama T, your mom.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how, basically just let's talk about how the journey began.
Yeah. So I think I'll start by just describing a little bit who my mom was. So when I think of iconic women in world history, like Mother Teresa and other people like that, you start to draw parallels to anyone that ever got to experience my mom. The way she could light up the room, her willingness to give shirt off her back. We were the house that all the friends came to, and they didn't just come, they ate us out of house and home every single day. And what would she do? Go refill and restock the shelves in the cupboard. And she did this on repeat because that's just the type of by everyone. And so fast forward to this experience of her being diagnosed with cancer and then ultimately losing her life in a very condensed and short amount of time. I think it was just a tremendous shock to so many because she had an ability to impact so many during her, 61 years on this earth. So it all started in the spring of 2019. My dad and her were walking along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, and she tripped, and she thought that she had tripped on a curb because her eyesight. They a month later went to visit my sister. My sister and her family were doing a couple-year stint in Switzerland, and the blurry vision started to come back. So they get back from Switzerland. This is July of 2019, and she goes to see an eye doctor. The eye doctor sees a massive tumor behind her eye. If you know anything about the different types of cancer and the chances of getting certain types, you'll know that ocular cancer happens to like 3 in 1 billion. The chances that the cancer starts behind the eye is so low that eye doctors will send you to go get scanned to try to figure out what the source of the cancer is, because oftentimes it will travel to your eye or to your face, but it won't start there. So that's what we did. Now we're in August of 2019. She gets her results back, and we find out that it is stage 4 lung cancer. And I'll admit, when you first hear, I think, this might be part my personality and part my naivety. You're super optimistic that, like, okay, I'm sure the stages mean something, and I'm sure that the cancer types have an impact on the ultimate prognosis here, but like, we're going to figure it out, right? We've all been sick before, and first, in many, many cases, we get better. And I think when we first received the news, that's what happened to us as well. So we're very optimistic. We're super hopeful that we're going to figure something out. And we learn over the next couple of weeks that stage 4 means, it originates somewhere and then it spreads to other parts of the body. Sometimes it can travel to treatable areas. Sometimes you don't get so lucky. At this time, it had moved to her spine, into other bones in her body, which is not great because blood is how it travels, and there's a lot of blood in your bones. So went through a series of surgeries over the next couple of months, radiation, chemotherapy, sending biopsies off to various libraries to see if there were certain types of treatments that would work better than others. And unfortunately, we didn't get lucky to find a match. There's actually a massive library of treatments in New Hampshire where you take a biopsy, you send it out to this library, and they try to match the type of cancer with treatments that have worked for people before. But if there is no match, it's great because you get to insert your understanding of what happened into the library.
Sure.
But they don't tell you the silver bullet, the secret to the test.
Sure.
And so we very much experienced that. So a few months into this journey, myself, other family members, you start to get the writing on the wall, right? The pace of decline is steep. Your options start to get increasingly limited. And doctors, this was one of my biggest takeaways or biggest surprises. Doctors are the smartest people when it comes to topics like this,
Sure.
right? When you're meeting with, we had we were fortunate to get care at Johns Hopkins, one of the leading cancer hospitals in the world. And our oncologist was one of the most published lung oncologists in the world. And she would sit you down and say, here are your 3 options. I'm going to leave the room for 10 minutes, and you're going to tell me what option to pick. And you're stunned in those moments. You're like, I know nothing. I'm an accountant. Like, I know nothing.
Right.
Why don't you just pick for me? I'm good with it. You read and write about this stuff all day. I don't.
Sure.
You pick.
Sure.
And that just, I think, goes to show how much more there is to learn about this disease in particular. If the smartest person in the world on this particular topic is still leaving choices, in my hands.
Sure.
And I think that was really the first time in my life that I acknowledged that, doctors and medicine, it's really as much trial and error, informed trial and error as anything else.
Sure.
And they're just doing the best that they can.
Right.
In those instances. So about halfway through, you start to witness the pace of decline, and you start to lose hope. And that's when I think it starts to get really emotional. But that's, I think, when you start witnessing small miracles. Obviously on a ton of medication, under an immense amount of pain, doesn't eat as much as she used to, and struggles keeping water down. Those types of things happen towards the end. But we would have these moments where we would be trying to ask her questions, to journal and write stories, on her way out. We had her record some books where she was reading the book and recording her voice, so that when we had children, they could hear her reading these books.
That's an incredible.
So she would go literally from being asleep for most of the day to somehow getting 20 or 30 minutes of energy and a voice to be able to do some of these things. And I remember in one of these sort of miraculous moments, asking her, two things about me that I was really interested in. What was her favorite trait about me? And her answer was persistence. And we'll get back to what we're doing here at Bereave and how that's so relevant. But I thought it was super profound in the moment, right? She's probably on.
Did you know that when she said that? Like, did you?
Sorry?
Did that surprise you? The way she answered that question.
It was just so matter of fact, right? Like, she's on morphine, and to be able to answer that question and just be so sure about it was, I think, what took me back the most. And I was just super thankful to have that moment because the second question was, if she had it her way, like, what would I be when I grow up? Like, what would make her really proud to go do? And she said, be a civic servant. And if you know anything about my mom and I's relationship, like, I think there are ways that I can, serve civically without, perhaps running for governor or something. And
is that what she's thinking? Is like, go be a politician?
Well, this is the first time I've ever heard that, like, she's interested in me spending my time this way.
So this is brand new,
right? But again, these are these like profound, miraculous moments where like she's just with it. And she's so sure about that response. And I was, for a year, like, what does she actually mean?
Right.
18 months after she passed, I ended up taking a role with Elevate Ventures. And when you think about this role in particular, it's a reflection of that relationship that she and I have, which is, she said civic servant. This is about as close to that as I'm going to get.
Sure.
But what a cool thing to look back on and reflect on. That is almost a premonition of sorts by her in her final moments. And there was just so many things like that.
Right.
And I'll share some more as we go.
Yeah. I'm curious. And this is really specific about that, but did her answers to you drive you to find something like an Elevate?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. In fact, my family was there when she responded this way, and we're all like, there's some risk in, running for office, man. And we all got a good chuckle, but I didn't. And honestly, hindsight's 2020. It wasn't until many months into my role at Elevate when I reflected back and was like, oh, this could have been what she meant.
Wow. So you've mentioned a couple of things that are interesting, and they come back to people. You started talking about relationships at the very beginning, and then you started, you just mentioned again, families around, right? Can you talk a little bit about kind of how people and family and friends started to show up, like when that started to happen, to start deliver support and goodwill to your family? Yeah.
So shout out to my dad for being the primary caretaker. Real quick thought on primary caretakers is they're human too. And so when they receive the news, they're in it with you, right? Every single day, doing everything they can to care for the person who is sick. And what I think others who aren't the primary caretakers, call us secondary caretakers, have to acknowledge in these instances when we're dealing with terminal illness is that it's an exhausting role. And humans are humans, and sometimes they need a break. So a few months in, call it 3 months after diagnosis in August of 19, now we're in October, November timeframe, brothers and sisters and in-laws start to step up and fly out to Baltimore and spend weeks on end playing the primary caretaking role while my dad gets back to work and tries to live more of a normal life or schedule as a way to refresh his energy. For all those who've been through cancer before, there's one commonality that we all share is that the number of doctor's appointments and hospital visits is insane. And you're oftentimes repeating what happened at the last one to the next doctor because the systems aren't connected. which is crazy. My first business idea, and we're going to get to maybe 3 if I have it my way today,
Sure.
was called Cancer Quarterback. And
Sure.
the whole intent behind Cancer Quarterback was just to figure out an easier way to organize yourself so that every time you show up to these doctor's appointments, you can just be like, look, like I'm tired of answering the same question. I just did it 7 times today.
Yeah.
Like, here's what you need to know. There.
Yeah. Right.
Go. We have this paper binder. I was probably 3, 4, 5 inches thick of just all the different notes and paperwork and stuff that they give you. I wish it was a playbook. It was a collection of junk that we had to organize and keep organized.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when you go to a radiologist and you want to go to a different radiologist to get an opinion, both of them hand you 50 pages of documents that don't make any sense. Like, what do you do with all this information? Because the next time you go see your oncologist, they want to know both.
Gotcha.
And it's just, that's like on repeat.
Yeah.
The amount of specialists that need to be coordinated that aren't always, unfortunately.
Sure. So is that, it sounds like a big moment where family and friends started really showing up is to support your dad. Even.
Yeah. Like I'll hang in the guest bedroom and I'll do this for a while. I'll do all the meds. I'll do all the appointments. I'll do all the note taking, go take some time to work out or, take a long shower or go to work for a little bit and get caught up.
Right.
That started happening in October, November.
I mean, that seems like a full-time job trying to manage people in and out and who's doing what.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
Yeah.
And even think about how hard it is to delegate the responsibilities of the primary caretaker to the folks that are coming in and stepping up. Even that is a job in itself, right?
Sure.
So again, primary caretakers, they are angels among us because that role is so hard.
Sure.
So that starts happening October, November, December. By this point, we understand that we're talking about single-digit months, potentially double-digit weeks, but the window's starting to close. And she's progressing such that around Christmas time, we heard for the first time from doctors that this could be the last time that she's allowed on a plane. So we had a decision to make. For Christmas, do we want to go to a beach, which was her favorite place to hang out, or do we want to try to go home and spend some time with family and friends? And so we ultimately, her and I flew back to Indy for Christmas, and we threw her a surprise going away party. I'm using air quotes because she wasn't just moving away for a little bit.
Right.
But everybody flocked to Indianapolis that Christmas break of 2019. And it was such a beautiful day. She was at the point where, she'd have about an hour of energy in between naps for whatever reason. At this, particular time, she was up for 4 hours on end.
Oh, wow.
Just full with friends and family, ready to rock. Now, we probably sped things up a little bit because we crushed her, but she was having a blast.
That's awesome.
So we fly her back. That was Christmas, but everybody got a chance to see her when she was a little bit better than the ultimate decline that took place when we got back. It was towards the end of January, and we were going to all come together for my dad's fundraiser. He's a baseball coach at Towson University. They do this fundraiser before the season starts. It's called the First Pitch Dinner. And we were going to get her all dressed up, makeup, the whole nine, put a dress on her, get really excited to have this kind of final hurrah. And it went perfectly. I remember just how beautiful she looked in her dress, in a wheelchair at this point, but had a blast. She was up way past her bedtime, the whole 9 yards. And it wasn't until the Sunday after that Saturday night that the sort of hospice level decline began. So that was really our last moment.
Right.
At this point, she couldn't fly, but one of her last wishes was to pass away in Indianapolis.
Okay.
Around family.
Sure.
So we end up flying Robin home that Sunday to prepare. Robin's my wife.
Gotcha. Okay. Just making sure we're tracking.
We elected to do in-home hospice, which is probably for another podcast at some point if anybody wants to know about that.
Sure.
But what an incredible honor to be able to offer that up as an option. So she went to prepare our dining room that we ultimately turned into a hospice bedroom. And we took 2 cars following each other to drive my mom home to put her in her final resting place. What an interesting experience that was. And we'll circle back to one of these things that I always think about when we're thinking about and strategizing about Bereave. But there are different state laws as it relates to when and how people die, what you do with the body.
Sure.
And Ohio is one of those weird states. So we're driving from Maryland to Indy, and we're going to be spending 5.5 hours or so driving through the state of Ohio with someone in hospice, effectively. So like at any point, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, it could be her last moments.
Right.
And so we actually had an attorney on call to understand what those laws were in the event that it happened. And in the state of Ohio, like you can get in some trouble if you don't follow the steps the right way.
Sure.
Which I find fascinating that like there are laws out there that wouldn't give folks the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sure there's more context and backstory that I don't appreciate.
Right.
So we get her home, and for the next 10 days, we had the distinct honor and privilege to have in-home hospice at our house. She actually passed away 10 days later on February 10th of 2020. So diagnosis August 19th of 2019, passed away on February 10th of 2020. So that time flies.
Yeah.
And you are shocked almost the whole time.
Did it feel like it was moving fast?
Yeah. It was like time was fleeting.
Sure.
There was no way to slow it down. And so one of the questions you asked me a while ago, it's this concept of like, one of the things I'm super passionate about and why I tend to share this is because this is one of those lessons that you only learn when it's too late. If there are like, if you're trying to play catch up with time and you learn that someone's on their way out, time is beginning to fleet.
Sure.
There is, you can't catch up. Like it runs out faster than what you're hoping for.
So in those moments you realize that like time is moving quickly. Like what's going through your mind? What's going through your family's mind? Like how does that start to change the way that you move through your day?
Yeah. It's a pretty gnarly experience. It's different for everyone. One of the hardest things to acknowledge is that life has to continue, and all you want to do is spend time with the person that's dying.
Sure.
And so, how do you find that balance? You're in this constant, almost like moral tug and pull with yourself. Like how much time is too much time away from work? How much time is not enough time with my mom who's dying?
Right.
And so that there's no playbook for that. So it's constantly, every week, every weekend, every opportunity, you're trying to weigh which one is more important, which sounds so silly in hindsight, right? Obviously, if you could just take 7 months off but when they get diagnosed, you don't know that there's only 5 months left, right? Every month is like you're waiting on some other result or some other test or some other procedure to get a better understanding of what the prognosis looks like going forward. So that's the hardest part, I think, is just balancing life and just how heavy the situation that you're going through is.
Yeah, totally. And then so you're having this tug of war with yourself. You're managing this stack of papers and doctors and logistics and the what ifs, like as you're moving through this, and I know your dad's the primary, but you're also a very high, call you 1B caregiver at this point. Like what is the family experiencing that maybe surprised you in some way?
Yeah, there was almost a divide in my family, and divide might not be the right word, because that sounds like we weren't all in it to win it. We very much were. But it was around this idea of like, my dad and my sister like really, really wanted her to fight. And that came from a really good place.
Sure.
Like, I appreciate that.
Sure.
And fighting in this case means eating the right foods, continuing to work out, and like doing the things that the doctors are telling you to do. A couple of months before she passed, I remember having a real conversation with her, and it's like, what do you want?
Right.
Like, if you don't want to do the rubber band exercises that they just gave you, like, it's all good. Let's just have that conversation now. And if you want to eat chocolate for the last 85 days of your life, like, let's let it rip. Like, I'll go to CVS right now and clean out the chocolate rack, you know? And that's kind of, my sister's a nurse. My dad's the primary caregiver. That we all are afraid of losing her, and we're all going to miss her terribly. And it was just like taking that moment to say to her, like, let's do this your way. Like, if you're done fighting, it's okay. Let's have that conversation now. Let's all like hit that head on, and let's figure out what that means for the next, few weeks or months that we have left.
Right.
And that went on for quite a while. This kind of, people arrive at that conclusion on different timelines, even if you're all family members.
Right. So is it safe to say that your dining room, when you got your mom home to your house, like full of the things, chocolates, like full of that kind of thing? Like, is that?
Yeah. Maybe not chocolates.
Yep.
Because
but as that, as
she's
using
like
that
drinking
example,
water from like a foam sucker.
Sure.
That's kind of where you're at, hospice. But yeah, I remember having, like music playing.
Right.
That was awesome. She loves, Precious Moments, specifically Precious Moment Angels.
Okay.
I would say there was no less than, 85, 90 angels in this dining room. So, whether or not she saw her surroundings or appreciated it, I know she could feel it.
Right.
And in those 10 days of in-home hospice, these miracles were the most pronounced. A certain member of the family would come to visit her, sit bedside, and out of nowhere, she would just rise to give them a hug.
Where she hadn't
been unable to move for 2 days straight, right? We would play music, and she would move a certain way to certain songs. Right before we lost her last breath, my best friend was sprinting to get there, and at any point, she could have gone, but she waited until he got there.
Oh, wow.
So think big group hug all around her, and then my best friend running through the front door, which was like a son to her. And it wasn't until he got to be a part of the group hug that she finally laid to rest. That's powerful.
That is. I think the interesting thing to me is the fact that even though you had all of these things going on, from the papers to the emotion to the people, like the fact that you were able to see these little moments is a pretty miraculous thing in of itself.
Yeah.
It feels like. Did you share those moments did your family see them? Was this something that everybody recognized, or was it something that Matt had to say, like, oh my gosh, did you realize what just happened?
I think everyone's perspective is a little bit different. In certain cases, people would share their moments with me that I didn't get to live firsthand. But I think our family did a really good job of recognizing, God in the room, or a power, much bigger than all of us. That's kind of taken the wheel at this point. And that was when I hope we get to talk about here in a sec. One of the drivers for Bereave, because once she's gone, all I wanted to do was share those stories, those moments, the miracles, the the life stories, the life lessons, the impact that she had on others. And, basically right after she was gone, it triggered a series of responsibilities that fell directly on my dad, myself, my sister, my aunt, that were a bear to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. You've talked a lot about that. You've mentioned, Bereave. And one of the things that you have said to me and others, is talking about, how you turned your grief into something else and how you proceeded that. But you've also talked about latent grief, right? And so you're in this moment and you're sharing things. You've got this list of tasks to go accomplish. Can you talk a little bit about, I think you've said it's something to the effect of like was 12 to 15 months before the grief actually hit you. And that is probably not very uncommon. And there are a lot of people who have said something in, a lot of different ranges sitting right on that right on that same couch. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like and how that eventually kind of caught up with you?
Yeah. So my mom's paternal side, and I think you could argue parts of my dad's side as well, are workaholics. And so I found it very convenient to stay as busy as possible the weeks, months after she passed, to not really have to sit in my own emotion too long. And at the time, we were working through a merger of a company that I worked with here in town that ultimately sold in November of 20. So she dies in February of 20. I returned to work in March of 20. COVID happens in March of 20, which was another interesting dynamic here. And I go into, this transaction, basically consuming every ounce of my energy and time for, what is that, 9-10 months to see that transaction through in November of 20. So I didn't really give grief time to enter my life.
Didn't have a shot.
Yeah.
It didn't have a shot. You just,
It wasn't getting through.
Right.
And any downtime that was created from COVID at that time, I spent on Bereave, working with Eli and Keegan on what this would ultimately come to be.
Why was that important to you to do?
I left that experience feeling so appreciative, so emotional, and the third, maybe not so positive reaction was so surprised at this one dynamic, this idea that like everybody dies, and we have figured out a way to personalize everything that we do as people and consumers in almost every other touch point. The way we shop, the way we watch TV, the way we scroll on our phones, weddings, right? How many times your parents told you about that one keg they bought for their 300-person wedding back in the day, and everyone got a solo cup and it cost $500, right? Like, look at them now. I just got back from a 5-day wedding in Palm Springs. This was highly, highly custom, and it's awesome. That's how it should be. It's a big day, right? And everybody dies, and we haven't addressed that reality at all. Sure, there are a few, fringe opportunities to send your ashes to the moon or down to the ocean floor or whatever, turn them into a diamond. Okay, that's all well and good. But there's not hardly enough attention on the awful experience you have to go through when you lose someone close to you. And that just didn't sit with me very well. I felt like, despite everyone's best efforts, this is not an indictment on anyone that helped us along the way. I thought they did the best they could. The fact that we are asking the next of kin or the closest of friends to go through what they have to go through in the days following the loss of their loved one just didn't seem right. And you have these moments, I think, in your life where you acknowledge this limited time that you have on earth, and you're here to do a few special things. Like everyone's going to leave their mark on this world in some way. This is an opportunity to do that for everyone else.
Sure.
And my mom, that was like her ethos. So no better way to pay homage to her,
right,
posthumously than to pursue something like this that would have an impact on literally every single person in the world.
Sure. It almost sounds like, and regardless of religion and spiritual nature, but it almost sounds like, in a very strong manner, she was guiding you in some way to this thing that you found injustice in. After she tells you you're going to be a civil servant, here's this injustice. Can you find a way to bring light to this in some way and to change people's lives in some way?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've been at this, at least thinking about it in earnest, since May, June of 2020. So just over 3 years, it's been in our brains. And even in that 3-year period, I remember, hell, even the way that you and I got introduced, right? There are these moments where I know, whether it's my parents or my mom or Eli's parents or someone else close to the business, Pat's father, someone's doing something because there are things that happen for this business in service of, again, everyone in the world. That the only thing you can blame them on is like someone doing something special for you.
Somebody pulling some strings somewhere.
Right. It's like, that's the only thing. Because we're just so fortunate in certain periods or chapters of this business's existence to be able to look at those types of things and just only be able to blame, someone up there doing something.
Sure. Yeah, no kidding. You've said something that is caught in me in like deep thought. Sometimes every time you say it, I kind of stop and pause, but you've used the phrase turning mourning into mission. And I know you have this latent grief experience, and at the same time, you've got like this driver to go do something and to go change something. And you've got the things that your mom has said to you. The phrase turning mourning into mission. Can you talk a little bit about how, like, when that clicked to figure out like, hey, I've really got to go figure this out? Yeah,
I think I might answer that in the inverse real quick and touch on latent grief for a second, because my mourning into mission comments are going to be a little stronger and direct on purpose. But latent grief, I'll just share that experience with everyone. 12 months go by. It isn't until the 1-year anniversary of her passing that I started to feel like I was spiraling a little bit. Like I was losing control of my ability to remain sane. I've never had a tremendous amount of anxiety. I've never had a tremendous amount of doubt about the future. I've never had a tremendous amount of restlessness. But it was, her 1-year anniversary of her passing, her birthday, and Mother's Day in this 90-day period, a year after she had passed.
That's a lot.
Big days that just made everything feel so heavy. And it was in that experience where I just knew I wasn't right, and I wasn't going to be able to do it by myself. And so I finally buckled down, thanks to my wife, my family, and Pat Rogers, an advisor, an investor in Bereave, and a dear friend of mine who had worked through something similar a few years prior, introduced me to a therapist. And so my first comments are that, like, there are things about grief that need time and space and that you must acknowledge. Whether you leverage professional help or you've just born with an ability to work through it yourself.
Sure.
Like ignoring it for 12 months, I wouldn't suggest to anybody.
Sure.
Because that can start to turn into a beast that's hard to tame. I feel very fortunate that I received the help when I did and how I did. But it took 18 months to work through something that took 12 to 15 months to boil up. And so I in part, that's on me, right? Because for the 12 months following the death, I didn't create any space for it to be addressed at all. But in doing so, some of the takeaways from that experience with my therapist was all about, holding yourself accountable to the steps that you need to take to work through it. It is obviously the most sad thing that's ever happened to me.
Sure.
And frankly, the only way that humans are able to work through it, I believe, is if you actually put the work in to get through it.
Yeah.
And it's not something that goes away either. This is work that you'll have to commit to for the rest of your life. And so this concept of mourning into mission is one that that I've kind of arrived at as like, look, I can sulk, I can feel depressed about how much I miss her and the things that we don't get to experience together. She will never meet my children, for example.
Sure.
She'll never be a part of their major milestones in their life. Or I can do something about it. I can leverage those feelings and do something about a cause that is important to her. It could be a number of things. In this particular case, this was something that I was really passionate about to go solve. And I think that she would be really supportive of because of just how many people it touches.
Yeah. It's interesting you said the phrase leverage feelings. And from conversations that we've had here, there are certain reactions that are very similar to that. They're like, you know what, I'm going to go do this thing because that's what they would have wanted. There are other reactions that, leave people in the mode of heavy depression, grief, tough to get out of that. It sounds like because you were able to have back to the people again and back to the relationships that you've forged throughout your life and your family has forged throughout their lives, that moment of somebody coming to help. You talk about Pat, you talk about the rest of your family and introducing you to a therapist, and it takes 18 months from there to start to work through it. That you were able to say, I'm ready to go do this. Yeah. Do you feel like had that not occurred, had those people not been around you, and had you not been introduced to that therapist, do you feel like this would have happened by now? Do you feel like you would have continued to spiral? Like, where have you thought about that? And like, if those strings hadn't been pulled in the background by somebody just like they are today, like, what goes on, do you think?
Yeah, I think you can get to a really dark place really quick if you start to think about, okay, like that's how I felt that 90-day period.
Yep.
Pretty much by the end of it, acknowledging that like I did not have the tools to work through that, how I was feeling at the time. It was very apparent to my wife that I didn't have the tools, right? And she's on the sidelines trying to figure out how to help, but she doesn't really know either because I don't frankly know myself. I don't know what's going on. I would imagine if we didn't take the steps at that time to start to work through some of that, that it gets exponentially worse at a pace that can be pretty unrelenting. And the thought of that's really scary.
Yeah. So when people that don't have that support system, like what have you experienced tools? Have you experienced resources? Because you were in a lucky spot to have that.
Yeah.
Right. Are there things that you have encountered that people might be able to reach for and grab for if they are, if they don't have that moment with somebody just kind of pulls them out of it?
Yeah. I mean, this kind of goes back to the opener. There is, I think your willingness to share your own experience does an incredible job of inviting others to be vulnerable and to be supportive. And it's when you're guarded that feeling of isolation perpetuates. And so, irrespective of like what you could go Google or online courses or companies like Bereave or whatever. Like if you could distill it down to one takeaway from this session, it would just be like there's so much power in sharing with the person next to you, and you'll shock yourself as to what happens next. I mean, you've shared in your first year with us what some of those conversations have been like with complete strangers, mind you.
Totally.
That take turns that neither of us were ever expecting.
Right.
And it all starts because the person is willing to open up about it.
Totally.
In fact, when we think about like our mission here is to save time for those who need it in their time of greatest need. And I think that's a profound mission. But I think one of the ancillary impacts to society more generally is that like we're not afraid to talk about this thing that is going to happen.
Sure.
Why are we so scared to talk about and be open with each other about perhaps the only thing that we all have in common? Right. Like there's 100% chance that all of us are going to experience this event together. Sure. We're all dying.
Sure.
And for whatever reason, it's like everyone goes mute the minute you say the D word.
And this is so great. And I know I asked a super dark question about what could have happened, but that is such a powerful thing because there are people that are listening to you right now that don't have the Pat Rogers and the friends and those things. And the fact that they can go just talk about it and it starts to open up maybe some feelings, maybe some opportunity, who knows? But having those conversations, whether it's a professional or just the person sitting next to you, somebody who's offering to help, can be incredibly helpful in that journey. And the fact that, just like you're saying, I mean, we struggle to talk about it. When people talk about death, they always, I shouldn't say they always, but often the precursor is some sort of comment about, hey, I'm sorry to get heavy, or I'm sorry to get dark, or I'm sorry to get morbid, instead of just talking about it. Right.
I mean, you and I, we do that far too often. Right.
Yeah, totally.
It's like,
but the fact that, the resource that you just provided to people who might be in that spot where you were without the resources to just have a conversation, if you can pull it off, can be pretty liberating.
Yeah. And I get asked a lot, like, is it better to have conversation with someone who's lost somebody because they actually can relate to you, or someone who hasn't? And I'm like, I don't know, depending on the day. Right. Like sometimes I don't want to know what their experience was because that's like double heavy.
Sure.
I want to go to an objective third party, a complete stranger who knows nothing about my mom, nothing about death, nothing about my experience, just so that I can hear their, uninformed opinion about how to feel happy today. So I would just literally simplify it and say, like, be comfortable sharing. Try to get comfortable sharing with whoever, and you'll be really shocked at how different and beneficial all of those conversations are.
Yeah. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah.
That right there in terms of maybe unsolicited advice. And I know it sounds easier than a lot of things to try to find a therapist and to go through, find your community and those things. Those things can be really difficult in those moments. The fact that if you can muster up the words and you can find somebody who's willing to listen for a moment, that's a really powerful tool that is free.
Yeah. And I think that the like one last comment I'll make on this that should provide everyone watching this a tremendous amount of hope is that this is one of those things that gets easier. Like I can't say with certainty that like grieving gets easier. Right? You're going to have really bad days. You're going to have okay days. But talking about it absolutely gets easier with reps. Like, I mean, Eli and I have been friends for a long time. We've talked now more about each of our shared experiences since Bereave than we ever did prior. And every time we talk about it now, we're more comfortable sharing than we were the time before.
Yeah.
That I can guarantee. Yeah. Grief might not get easier, but talking about it absolutely does with practice.
That's huge. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing all of this. Thank you to Mama T for looking over us.
Absolutely.
Anything that we should hit on before we adjourn?
Well, this has been awesome. I never, in my wildest dreams, would have thought that I'd be sitting in Bereave Studios on a podcast talking about my mom.
Yeah.
But
how's it feel?
This is the plan that someone has for us, and it feels liberating, quite frankly.
Good.
Again, it's one of those things I think that I feel very fortunate about to feel comfortable enough to share and be open about it. It's makes me feel better.
Yeah.
And so, anytime that I can help is important to me, and my hope for this team, our time and collective effort in and on Bereave is to be able to extend that to as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your courage to, turn the mourning into mission. Thank you for your generosity to just get a start, and you and Eli and Keegan for having the strength and the courage just to start the conversation. It's a long haul. It's going to be a long haul. But people like you guys who've started it, and with the stories that you have and the stories that you can share and your willingness to just be open in public are going to serve so many people. So thanks for that.
And thank you, man. Thank you for joining us on this ride and showing us the way.
Of course. Thanks for having me.